Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of the sprawling suburban home as Derek Lansing adjusted his tie, preparing for another day at his private security consulting firm. At 38, Derek had built his life on precision and control. His military background had taught him to read people, to anticipate threats, and to respond with calculated force when necessary. These skills had served him well in both his business ventures and his marriage to Allison. Derek had met Allison 6 years ago at Charity Gala. She was 25 then, a stunning blonde with an infectious laugh and a seemingly genuine warmth that drew him in completely. Her background was modest. She'd grown up in a small town in Ohio, worked her way through community college, and was trying to make it as a freelance photographer when they met. Derek, already financially successful from his consulting work with high-profile clients, had been charmed by her down-to-earth nature and apparent innocence. Their courtship had been whirlwind. Derek showered her with expensive gifts, exotic vacations, and eventually, a marriage proposal that included a 5-carat diamond ring. Allison had seemed overwhelmed by his generosity, often commenting how she couldn't believe someone like him would choose someone like her. Derek had interpreted this as humility, even endearing insecurity. Looking back now, as he watched her sleep in their king-sized bed, he wondered if it had been something else entirely. Their daughter Emma had arrived 3 years into their marriage. At 4 years old now, she was the light of Derek's life, a bright, curious child with Allison's blonde hair and Derek's sharp green eyes. Derek doted on Emma, perhaps overcompensating for his own childhood with an absent military father. He made sure to be present for every bedtime story, every scraped knee, every small milestone. But lately, something had fell off in the Lansing household. It started with small things Derek couldn't quite pinpoint. Allison seemed distant, distracted. She'd started taking more photography assignments that required her to stay out late or travel overnight. Their intimate moments had become perfunctory, lacking the passion that had once defined their relationship. When Derek tried to discuss it, Allison would deflect, claiming stress from work or exhaustion from chasing after Emma. Then there were the phone calls. Derek would walk into a room and find Allison quickly ending conversations, claiming it was just a client or her sister. But her sister lived in Ohio and rarely called, and Derek knew enough about Allison's photography business to know that most client communications happened via email. The final red flag had been Emma's behavior. His normally cheerful daughter had become increasingly anxious and secretive. She would whisper things to Allison that stopped abruptly when Derek entered the room. Emma had also begun having nightmares, waking up crying about the bad man, but unable to explain who this person was when Derek pressed for details. Derek's military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct screamed that something was fundamentally wrong in his home. But he was a methodical man who believed in gathering intelligence before acting. So he watched, he listened, and he waited. This particular morning, as Derek finished his coffee and prepared to leave for the office, he noticed Allison was still asleep despite it being nearly 9 o'clock. Emma sat at the kitchen table, quietly eating her cereal while watching cartoons on the tablet Derek had bought her. "Daddy has to go to work now, sweetheart," Derek said, kissing the top of Emma's head. "Be good for Mommy." Emma looked up at him with those serious green eyes. "Daddy, I don't like the games Mommy makes me play." Derek knelt down to Emma's level. In his line of work, he'd learned that children often held crucial information, but getting them to share it required patience and the right approach. "What kind of games, Emma?" "Secret games. She says we can't tell you about them because they're special surprises." A chill ran down Derek's spine. In his security consulting work, he'd seen enough cases involving manipulation and abuse to know that special secrets were never a good sign. But he forced his voice to remain calm and gentle. "What kind of secret games?" Emma glanced toward the stairs, as if checking to make sure Allison wasn't coming down. Then she leaned closer to Derek and whispered, "Sometimes she gives me special medicine to put in your food." She says it's vitamins to make you strong, but I have to be very careful and quiet about it. Derek felt his world tilt on its axis. Years of combat training kept his expression neutral, but inside, a cold fury was beginning to build. Someone was using his 4-year-old daughter to poison him. And if Allison was orchestrating this, then every assumption he'd made about his wife, his marriage, his life, was wrong. Can you show Daddy where this special medicine is, Emma? Emma nodded and led him to a kitchen cabinet Derek rarely opened, the one where Allison kept her vitamins and supplements. Hidden behind a bottle of prenatal vitamins from her pregnancy was a small brown vial with no label. Derek pocketed the vial without Emma seeing. His mind was already working, processing possibilities and planning his next moves. If someone was poisoning him, it explained the mysterious illnesses he'd been experiencing over the past few months, the unexplained fatigue, the occasional nausea, the general feeling of being unwell that doctors hadn't been able to diagnose. Emma, this is very important, Derek said, his voice still gentle but serious. From now on, you don't put anything in Daddy's food unless Daddy says it's okay. And if anyone asks you to do secret things that we can't tell other people about, you come and tell Daddy immediately. Can you do that for me? Emma nodded solemnly. Are you mad at me, Daddy? Derek pulled his daughter into a fierce hug. No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble. You were trying to help, and that makes you a good girl. But sometimes grown-ups lie to children, and that's not okay. As Derek drove to his office that morning, his mind was already shifting into the methodical, ruthless mode that had made him successful in both military operations and private security. Someone had turned his own child into an unwitting weapon against him. Someone had violated the sanctity of his home and family. And Derek Lansing was not the kind of man who forgave such transgressions. He had built his life on loyalty, trust, and the unshakable belief that family came first. If that foundation was cracked, then everything else would have to be torn down and rebuilt. And in Derek's experience, sometimes the only way to build something strong was to completely destroy what came before. Chapter 2. Derek's office occupied the top floor of a downtown building that housed his private security consulting firm, Lansing Solutions. The company specialized in corporate security, threat assessment, and discreet investigations for high-net-worth clients. Derek had built the business from the ground up after leaving the military, leveraging his special forces background and a network of contacts he developed over years of service. His assistant, Rebecca Torres, had been with him since the company's early days. A former military intelligence officer herself, Rebecca was one of the few people Derek trusted completely. She was sharp, discreet, and absolutely loyal, qualities that had served them both well in their line of work. Cancel my appointments for today, Derek told Rebecca as he strode into the office. I need you to run some tests on something, and I need complete privacy. Rebecca immediately recognized the tone in Derek's voice. She'd heard it before, during their military days, when a mission had taken an unexpected and dangerous turn. Without questions, she cleared his schedule and activated the office's privacy protocols, signal jammers that would block any electronic surveillance, and white noise generators that would prevent anyone from overhearing their conversations. Derek placed the small brown vial on his desk. I need to know exactly what this is and what it does to someone who ingests it regularly in small doses. Rebecca examined the vial without touching it. Where did this come from? My home. Someone's been using Emma to put this in my food. Rebecca's expression hardened. In her years working with Derek, she'd come to view his family as her own. The thought of someone using a child to poison Derek triggered the same protective instincts that had made her an exceptional soldier. I'll have it analyzed by our lab contact. Full spectrum analysis, toxicology report, everything. How long do you think this has been going on? 3 months, maybe 4. It coincides with when I started feeling off, fatigue, nausea, general malaise. Nothing severe enough to hospitalize me, but consistent enough to impact my performance. Derek's mind was already working through the implications. If someone wanted him dead, there are far more efficient methods. This felt more like a long-term strategy to weaken him, to make him vulnerable or dependent. But for what purpose? I also need you to run a full background check on Allison. Everything, finances, communications, travel records, the works. I know we did a basic check before we got married, but I want you to go deeper. Look for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that doesn't add up. Rebecca nodded. You suspect she's involved? I don't know what to suspect anymore. But someone with access to my house is orchestrating this, and Allison is the one who's been instructing Emma to add the substance to my food. What about surveillance? Do you want me to set up monitoring on the house? Derek considered this. His home security system was state-of-the-art, but it was designed to keep intruders out, not to monitor the activities of people who live there. Installing covert surveillance on his own family felt like crossing a line, but then again, using his daughter to poison him had already crossed every line that mattered. Not yet. I want to be more subtle about this. If Allison is involved in something, tipping her off too early could make things worse for Emma. The mention of his daughter refocused Derek's anger. Emma was innocent in all of this, a child being manipulated by adults who should have protected her. Whatever was happening, whatever game Allison was playing, Emma's safety was Derek's top priority. There's something else, Derek continued. I want you to look into any connections Allison might have that we don't know about. New friends, business associates, anyone who's entered her life recently. Rebecca made notes on her tablet. I'll start with her phone records and social media activity. If she's communicating with someone regularly, we'll find it. Be discreet. And Rebecca? Derek's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. This doesn't leave this room. Not until we know exactly what we're dealing with. After Rebecca left to begin her investigations, Derek sat alone in his office, staring out at the city below. He'd built his entire adult life around the principle that loyalty and trust were non-negotiable. In the military, betrayal meant death, not just for you, but for your entire unit. In his business, trust was the foundation that allowed clients to place their safety and security in his hands. But what happened when the betrayal came from inside your own home? Derek's phone buzzed with a text message from Allison. Hope you're having a good day at work. Emma and I are going to the park this afternoon. Love you. He stared at the message for a long moment. How many times had Allison sent him similar texts while she was orchestrating his slow poisoning? How many times had she kissed him goodbye in the morning while knowing she was systematically weakening him? Derek deleted the message without responding. Until he knew the full scope of what he was dealing with, every interaction with Allison would be a performance. And Derek had learned long ago that the best way to gather intelligence on an enemy was to let them believe they still held the advantage. His desk phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Rebecca's voice came through the secure line. Derek, I've got preliminary results on the substance. You need to see this right away. 20 minutes later, Rebecca placed a detailed toxicology report on Derek's desk. The results were both shocking and illuminating. It's a compound called thorazine, mixed with small amounts of lithium, Rebecca explained. In therapeutic doses, it's used to treat severe psychiatric conditions. But in the concentrations found in your sample, administered regularly over time, it would cause exactly the symptoms you've been experiencing: fatigue, cognitive impairment, general physical weakness. Derek studied the report. Someone's been chemically restraining me. That's exactly what this is. Look at this. Rebecca pointed to a section of the report. The mixture is precise, calculated to keep you functional but diminished. This is an amateur hour. Whoever prepared this knows what they're doing. How long would it take for me to recover full capacity if I stopped ingesting it? With your physical condition and metabolism? Maybe 2 to 3 weeks for complete clearance, but you'd start feeling improvements within a few days. Derek felt a cold satisfaction. Knowing what had been done to him was the first step in undoing it. But more importantly, the sophistication of the poisoning suggested this wasn't just Allison acting alone. Someone with medical or pharmaceutical knowledge was involved. What about the background check on Allison? Rebecca's expression grew grim. That's where things get really interesting. I found some discrepancies in her personal history that we missed the first time around. She placed a file on the desk. Remember how she told you she grew up in Ohio and came to the city to pursue photography? Well, there's a 2-year gap in her history that she never accounted for. No employment records, no address listings, no social media activity. It's like she disappeared for 24 months before she met you. Derek opened the file and began reading. The woman he'd married, the mother of his child, had essentially been a ghost for 2 years before entering his life. And now she was poisoning him with the help of someone who had advanced pharmaceutical knowledge. There's more, Rebecca continued. I cross-referenced her recent communications and found a pattern. She's been in regular contact with someone using an encrypted messaging app. The contact uses the name Dr. Ray, and they've been communicating almost daily for the past 6 months. Derek looked up from the file. Dr. Ray, I'm still working on identifying him, but based on the timing and the sophistication of the poisoning compound, I think we've found our chemist. Derek leaned back in his chair, processing the information. His wife was not who she claimed to be. She was involved with someone who had medical knowledge. And together, they had been systematically poisoning him for months while using his own daughter as their delivery method. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound Derek had ever sustained. But beneath the pain, something else was growing. A cold, methodical fury that would not be satisfied until everyone responsible paid the full price for what they had done. In the military, Derek had been known for his ability to plan and execute operations with ruthless precision. His enemies had learned too late that Derek Lansing never forgot a betrayal, never forgave a transgression, and never stopped until justice was served. Allison and her mysterious doctor were about to discover exactly what kind of man they had chosen to betray. Chapter 3. The Web Unravels. Derek spent the next 3 days playing the role of the unsuspecting husband while Rebecca's investigation expanded. Each morning, he kissed Allison goodbye, ruffled Emma's hair, and left for work with the performance of a man who trusted his family completely. But every interaction was now calculated, every word measured for its intelligence value. The hardest part was watching Emma. His daughter had become withdrawn and anxious, clearly struggling with the burden of the secret games she'd been forced to play. Derek maintained their normal routines, bedtime stories, weekend activities, father-daughter time. But he could see the confusion in her eyes as she tried to reconcile the loving daddy she knew with the complicated adult world she'd been dragged into. On Thursday morning, Rebecca's investigation finally bore fruit. I've identified Dr. Ray, she announced as she entered Derek's office with a thick file. Dr. Raymond Kowalski, 42, former pharmaceutical researcher who lost his license 3 years ago for conducting unauthorized human trials. Derek examined the photograph Rebecca placed before him. Dr. Raymond Kowalski was tall and lean with dark hair and the kind of forgettable face that would blend into any crowd. But his background was far from forgettable. He was working for Meridian Pharmaceuticals, developing new psychiatric medications, Rebecca continued. Got caught running unsanctioned trials on vulnerable patients. Lost his license. Faced criminal charges that were eventually dropped due to technicalities. But his career in legitimate research was over. How does he connect to Allison? That's where it gets interesting. Rebecca opened another section of the file. Remember that 2-year gap in Allison's history? I finally tracked it down. She was living in Portland during that time, working as a receptionist at a private medical clinic. Guess who was running experimental treatments out of that same clinic? Derek felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Kowalski. Exactly. The clinic was eventually shut down by the state medical board for ethical violations, but not before Allison and Kowalski had 2 years to develop their relationship. Derek studied the timeline Rebecca had constructed. So, she didn't meet me by chance at that charity gala. I don't think so. Look at this. Rebecca placed surveillance photos on the desk. I've been tracking Kowalski's current activities. He's been living in an apartment about 20 miles from your house. And these photos show him meeting with Allison at various locations over the past 6 months. The photographs were damning. Allison and Kowalski in coffee shops, walking through parks, sitting in his car in secluded parking lots. In several images, they were clearly intimate, holding hands, kissing, embracing in ways that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Derek felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Whatever love he'd felt for Allison died in that moment, replaced by something far more dangerous. She hadn't just betrayed their marriage. She'd orchestrated their entire relationship as part of some elaborate scheme. What's their endgame? Derek asked. I think I know. Rebecca placed insurance documents on the desk. You have a $5 million life insurance policy with Allison as the primary beneficiary. But here's the thing. The policy has a clause that doubles the payout if her death is ruled accidental or due to natural causes. Derek stared at the documents. He'd purchased the insurance policy shortly after Emma was born, wanting to ensure his family would be financially secure if something happened to him. It had seemed like a responsible decision at the time. They're not trying to kill me quickly, Derek realized. They're planning to make it look like a gradual decline in health, maybe a heart attack or stroke brought on by the stress of the medication. $10 million with no questions asked. That's my assessment. The poisoning has been designed to weaken your cardiovascular system over time. A few more months of this, and you could have a completely natural-looking cardiac event. Rebecca placed one final document on the desk. There's something else. I've been monitoring Allison's financial activity. She's been making regular transfers to an offshore account, small amounts that wouldn't trigger automatic reporting, but they add up to nearly $50,000 over the past year. Derek examined the financial records. The money was coming from their joint account, funds that he'd earned through his business and investments. Allison had been systematically stealing from him while poisoning him and planning his death. I also found this. Rebecca handed him a printed email exchange between Allison and Kowalski. They've been discussing accelerating their timeline. Apparently, they're getting impatient. Derek read the emails with growing fury. The messages revealed the cold calculation behind their plan. Allison discussed Derek's declining health with clinical detachment, while Kowalski provided guidance on adjusting the dosage to speed up the process. Most disturbing were the casual references to Emma, how to better manipulate her, how to ensure she wouldn't remember the details later, how to keep her from accidentally revealing their activities. They were discussing his daughter like she was a tool to be used and discarded. Derek set the emails aside and looked at Rebecca. I want you to arrange a meeting. With who? Dr. Raymond Kowalski. I think it's time he and I had a conversation. Rebecca recognized the tone in Derek's voice. She'd heard it before, in the field, when Derek had transitioned from gathering intelligence to planning action. It was the voice of a man who had made a decision that would change everything. Derek, be careful. If you move too fast. I'm not moving fast, Derek interrupted. I'm moving precisely. Kowalski is the key to this whole operation. Without him, Allison is just an unfaithful wife. With him, she's part of a conspiracy to commit murder. Derek stood and walked to his office window, looking out at the city below. For months, he'd been living in a carefully constructed lie, believing his family was safe and his home was secure. Now he knew better. His wife was a stranger with a hidden past, his daughter was being used as a weapon against him, and his life was being slowly stolen away. But Derek Lansing was not the kind of man who accepted defeat. He'd built his career on identifying threats and neutralizing them with extreme prejudice. The fact that this particular threat came from inside his own home only made his response more personal, more complete. Set up the meeting for tomorrow night, Derek told Rebecca. Somewhere private where we won't be interrupted. What are you planning? Derek turned from a window, and Rebecca saw something in his eyes that reminded her why Derek had been such an effective soldier. It was the look of a man who had identified his enemies and was prepared to do whatever was necessary to eliminate them. I'm planning to have a very frank conversation with Dr. Kowalski about the future, Derek said. And then I'm going to make sure he understands exactly what happens to people who threaten my family. Rebecca nodded, understanding that Derek had crossed a line from which there would be no return. The investigation phase was over. Now came the reckoning. As Derek prepared to leave the office that evening, he felt the familiar calm that had always preceded military operations. His enemies had made the mistake of underestimating him, of believing their careful plan made them untouchable. They had used his love for his family against him, turned his own home into a weapon, and corrupted his innocent daughter with their schemes. Derek Lansing was about to teach them why that had been a fatal miscalculation. Chapter 4. First Contact. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city had once been part of Derek's legitimate business operations, a storage facility for equipment his security firm no longer needed. Now it served a different purpose. The building was isolated, soundproof, and completely off the grid. More importantly, it was equipped with the kind of tools that Derek's military background had taught him could be very persuasive in the right circumstances. Derek arrived early to prepare. He'd spent the day purging the last traces of Kowalski's poison from his system, and for the first time in months, his mind felt completely clear. The fog of chemical restraint was lifting, replaced by the sharp focus that had made him legendary among his Special Forces unit. Rebecca had arranged a meeting through an intermediary, using a fake identity and a story about wanting to purchase experimental medications for a private client. Kowalski, apparently always eager for money, had agreed to meet at 9 o'clock. Derek checked his watch. 8:45 p.m. Dr. Raymond Kowalski would arrive, soon to find that his prospective client was someone very different from what he expected. The warehouse lights were dim when Kowalski's sedan pulled into the parking area. Derek watched through a security monitor as the doctor got out of his car, looking around nervously before approaching the entrance. Even in the grainy video feed, Derek could see that Kowalski was the kind of man who thought he was clever but lacked the survival instincts that real intelligence required. Derek waited in the shadows as Kowalski entered the warehouse. The doctor called out tentatively, "Hello? I'm here for the meeting about the special medication request." Derek stepped into the light and immediately saw Kowalski's face change as recognition dawned. The doctor's eyes went wide, and he took a step backward toward the door. "Dr. Raymond Kowalski," Derek said, his voice calm and controlled. "We need to have a conversation." Kowalski bolted for the exit, but Derek had anticipated this. The warehouse door had been modified with industrial-grade locks that could only be opened from the inside with a key that Derek now held. Kowalski pulled frantically at the handle before turning back to face Derek, his face pale with sudden understanding. "I don't know what you think you know," Kowalski began, but Derek cut him off with a gesture. "Dr. Kowalski, let me save us both some time. I know about the compound you've been having my wife slip into my food. I know about your relationship with Allison. I know about the insurance policy and your plan to make my death look like natural causes. What I don't know is why you thought you could do this to me and walk away." Derek moved closer, and Kowalski pressed himself against the locked door. "You have two choices," Derek continued. "You can tell me everything I want to know, and we can resolve this situation in a civilized manner. Or I can extract the information using methods I learned in the military that are considerably less pleasant." "You can't do this," Kowalski stammered. "This is kidnapping, false imprisonment. Dr. Kowalski, you've been poisoning me for months while manipulating my 4-year-old daughter into being your accomplice. I think we're well beyond worrying about legal technicalities." Derek gestured to a chair in the center of the warehouse. "Sit." When Kowalski hesitated, Derek's expression hardened. That wasn't a request. Kowalski sat down, his hands shaking. Derek pulled up another chair and positioned it directly in front of the doctor, close enough that their knees almost touched. "Now," Derek said, "tell me how this started." The story that emerged over the next hour was both more complex and more sordid than Derek had imagined. Kowalski confirmed that he and Allison had met at the medical clinic in Portland, but their relationship had begun long before Derek entered the picture. She was different then, Kowalski explained, his voice barely above a whisper. Ambitious, calculating. She knew I was developing compounds that could be used for unofficial purposes. She suggested we could work together, find wealthy targets, create opportunities. And I was what, target practice? No, you were supposed to be the real thing. Allison spent months researching you before that charity gala. She knew about your business, your finances, your background. The whole meeting was staged. Derek felt a cold satisfaction at having his suspicions confirmed, but also a deeper anger at the extent of the deception. Every moment of their courtship, every expression of love, every intimate moment had been a calculated performance. How many others? Derek asked. Kowalski's face went even paler. What do you mean? How many other marks have you and Allison targeted? The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Kowalski finally answered. 3. Before you, there were 3 others. Derek leaned forward. What happened to them? 2 survived. We We abandoned those operations when complications arose. But the third, Kowalski's voice trailed off. The third what? The third died. It was in Phoenix about 4 years ago. A real estate developer named Bradley Chun. The compound worked too fast. He had a heart attack before we could adjust the dosage. Derek absorbed this information with growing fury. Allison and Kowalski weren't just planning to murder him. They had already successfully murdered someone else, and they had refined their technique with his life. Where's the evidence of this previous murder? We were careful. It looked completely natural. No investigation, no questions asked. His wife collected the insurance money and disappeared. His wife. Kowalski realized his slip immediately. I mean, the woman he was married to. Allison was using a different identity then. Derek felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. Allison has done this before. She's not just your partner. She's your serial accomplice. For the next 2 hours, Derek systematically extracted every detail of their operation. The multiple identities Allison had used, the careful research they conducted on potential targets, the sophisticated network of forged documents and false histories they had developed. It was a professional operation that had been running for years. But what enraged Derek most was learning how they had manipulated Emma. Kowalski described in clinical detail how they had conditioned his daughter to follow their instructions, using a combination of threats and rewards to ensure her compliance. We told her that if she didn't help with the vitamins, something bad would happen to Mommy, Kowalski explained. Children that age are very susceptible to that kind of manipulation. Derek's control finally snapped. He grabbed Kowalski by the throat and lifted him partially out of the chair. You used my daughter's love for her mother to turn her into a weapon against me. Kowalski gasped for air, his face turning red. Derek held him there for a moment, then released his grip. The doctor collapsed back into the chair, gasping. Please, Kowalski wheezed. I'll do whatever you want. I'll testify against Allison. I'll return the money. I'll disappear. Just don't. Don't what? Derek asked. Don't treat you the way you were planning to treat me. Derek stood up and began pacing around Kowalski's chair. Here's what's going to happen, doctor. You're going to help me destroy Allison's operation completely. You're going to provide evidence of all your previous crimes. And you're going to ensure that she faces consequences for what she's done. And if I cooperate, Derek stopped pacing and looked directly at Kowalski. If you cooperate fully and follow my instructions exactly, you might survive this. But understand, your life as you know it is over. The only question is whether you end up in prison or in the ground. Kowalski nodded frantically. I'll do anything. What do you need me to do? Derek smiled, but there was no warmth in it. First, you're going to call Allison and tell her there's been a change of plans. The timeline is accelerating, and she needs to increase the dosage immediately. But that could kill you. That's the point, doctor. Allison is about to learn that her plan is working perfectly, right up until the moment it destroys her completely. Derek pulled out his phone and activated the recording function. And doctor, everything you've told me tonight is now documented. If you even think about betraying me or warning Allison, I will release that recording along with evidence of your previous murder. Do we understand each other? Kowalski nodded miserably. He had thought he was the predator in this situation, but now he understood that he had stumbled into the territory of something far more dangerous than himself. Derek Lansing was no longer playing defense. The hunt had begun, and Allison and Kowalski were about to discover that they had chosen the wrong man to target. Chapter 5. The Puppet Master. Derek's house felt different when he returned home that night. Where once it had been his sanctuary, now every room held the potential for deception and danger. But Derek moved through the familiar spaces with renewed purpose. He was no longer the victim of Allison's scheme. He was the architect of her downfall. Allison was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when Derek entered, offering the same warm smile that had once made his heart race and now filled him with cold calculation. "How was your day?" she asked, the picture of domestic innocence. "Productive," Derek replied, settling into his usual chair. "Very productive." They made small talk about Emma's day, weekend plans, and the mundane details of married life. Derek played his part perfectly, but internally he was cataloging every lie, every manipulation, every false gesture of affection. Allison had no idea that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse around her. His phone buzzed with a text message. Kowalski, following Derek's instructions, called, told her timeline accelerated. She's excited about increased dosage. Meeting tomorrow to discuss final phase. Derek deleted the message and looked up to find Allison watching him. Work? She asked. Just Rebecca, confirming some appointments for tomorrow. Derek excused himself to check on Emma, who was already asleep. Standing in his daughter's doorway, watching her peaceful face in the soft glow of her nightlight, Derek felt the full weight of his responsibility. Emma was the innocent victim in all of this, and ensuring her safety was paramount to everything else he was planning. The next morning brought phase 2 of Derek's plan. He kissed Allison goodbye, as usual, but instead of going to the office, he drove to a discreet location where Rebecca was waiting with a surveillance van. Kowalski's meeting with Allison at 10 a.m., Rebecca reported. Coffee shop on 5th Street. We'll have full audio and video coverage. Derek settled in to watch the monitors as his wife met with her accomplice. The coffee shop was busy enough to provide cover, but quiet enough for their recording equipment to capture clear audio. When Allison arrived, she looked radiant. The prospect of accelerating Derek's death had apparently put her in an excellent mood. Kowalski, in contrast, looked haggard and nervous. Derek's conversation with him had clearly left an impression. You look tired, Ray, Allison observed as she sat down. Everything okay? Just anxious to finish this, Kowalski replied, following Derek's script. The waiting is getting to me. Derek watched as Allison reached across the table and squeezed Kowalski's hand. Soon, baby. Very soon. Derek's been looking worse every day. Whatever you've been giving me is working perfectly. About that, Kowalski said, I think we need to increase the dosage again. Double it. Allison frowned. Isn't that risky? We don't want to be obvious. I've been running calculations. His system has built up a tolerance. We need to overwhelm his cardiovascular system more aggressively, or this could drag on for months. Derek listened to them discuss his murder with the casual tone of people planning a vacation. The recording equipment captured every word, every gesture, every callous laugh. By the time the meeting ended, Derek had enough evidence to destroy both of them in court. But Derek wasn't planning to rely on the courts. That afternoon, Derek implemented Phase 3. Using his security company's resources, he began systematically dismantling the infrastructure of Allison and Kowalski's operation. Bank accounts were traced and frozen. False identities were exposed and reported to authorities. The network of contacts they had used for previous crimes was mapped and documented. Rebecca coordinated with law enforcement contacts Derek had cultivated over the years. By evening, arrest warrants had been quietly prepared for both Allison and Kowalski, based on evidence of their previous murder in Phoenix and the ongoing attempt on Derek's life. But Derek had no intention of letting them be arrested. Prison was too clean, too civilized for what they had done. They had violated his family, used his daughter as a weapon, and planned his murder with cold calculation. They deserved something more personal, more final. That evening, Derek put Phase 4 into motion. He arrived home to find Allison in the kitchen, preparing dinner with unusual enthusiasm. Emma was at the table, coloring in a book, looking up occasionally with anxious glances at her mother. You seem happy tonight, Derek observed. Just feeling optimistic about the future, Allison replied, stirring something into the sauce for the pasta she was making. Derek watched her add what he knew was a lethal dose of Kowalski's compound to his dinner. She was literally trying to kill him while humming cheerfully and chatting about their weekend plans. Emma, sweetheart, Derek said, why don't you go wash your hands for dinner? After Emma left the room, Derek moved behind Allison at the stove. I know what you're doing, he said quietly. Allison tensed but didn't turn around. I don't know what you mean. I know about Dr. Raymond Kowalski. I know about Phoenix and Bradley Chun. I know about the compound you've been putting in my food for months. I know everything, Allison. Allison slowly turned to face him, and Derek saw her expression transform from confusion to calculation to something approaching admiration. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Long enough to plan your complete destruction." Allison laughed, a sound without warmth or humor. "You always were thorough, Derek. I'll give you that. But what exactly do you think you can do about it now?" "That depends on you," Derek replied. "You have one choice to make, and everything else follows from that decision." "What choice?" Derek stepped closer, close enough that only she could hear his words. "You can disappear tonight, leave Emma, and never contact us again, and I'll let you run. Or you can stay and face the consequences of what you've done. And if I choose to run, you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, never knowing when I'll decide that running wasn't enough punishment for what you did to my daughter." Allison studied Derek's face, and for the first time since he'd known her, he saw genuine fear in her eyes. She was finally understanding that the man she'd been slowly poisoning was far more dangerous than she had realized. "And if I stay?" Derek's smile was cold and final. "If you stay, Allison, you'll discover exactly what happens to people who threaten my family. And I promise you, it won't be quick or clean or civilized." The sound of Emma's footsteps returning from the bathroom broke the tension. Allison glanced toward the hallway, then back at Derek. "I need time to think," she said. "You have until midnight," Derek replied. "After that, the choice gets made for you." Derek spent the evening playing with Emma, reading her stories and maintaining the facade of normalcy, while Allison retreated to their bedroom. He could hear on the phone, presumably with Kowalski, their voices low and urgent. At 11:30 p.m., Derek tucked Emma into bed and kissed her goodnight. Whatever happened next, his daughter would be safe from the consequences. At midnight exactly, Derek checked their bedroom. Allison was gone, along with her clothes, jewelry, and personal items. She had chosen to run. Derek felt a moment of disappointment. Part of him had hoped she would stay and face him directly. But her flight was probably better for Emma, who would be spared the trauma of watching her mother face Derek's full vengeance. Derek's phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. Kowalski found dead in his apartment. Apparent suicide. Police report says he left a detailed confession about his crimes, including the Phoenix murder. Derek deleted the message and poured himself a glass of whiskey. Kowalski's suicide had been the inevitable result of his conversation with Derek. Some people, when faced with absolute ruin and personal destruction, chose to end things on their own terms rather than face the alternatives Derek had outlined. Allison was still out there somewhere, but Derek was patient. He had resources, connections, and most importantly, he had time. She could run for now, but eventually she would make a mistake, and Derek would be waiting. For tonight, though, it was enough to know that Emma was safe, the immediate threat was neutralized, and Derek's enemies had learned the price of betraying his trust. Derek Lansing protected his family with absolute ruthlessness, and he never forgot a betrayal. Allison would spend the rest of her life learning the truth of that statement. Chapter 6. Closing the Circle. 3 months after Allison's disappearance, Derek had settled into a new routine with Emma. His daughter had initially been confused by her mother's sudden absence, but children were remarkably resilient when given consistent love and stability. Derek had explained that mommy had to go away for work and wouldn't be coming back, but that daddy would always be there to take care of her. Emma seemed relieved more than anything else. The anxiety and secretiveness that had plagued her during the months of Allison's manipulation had gradually faded. She was sleeping through the night again, laughing more freely, and had stopped asking about the secret games that had burdened her small shoulders. Derek hired Maria Santos, a former military nurse with impeccable credentials, to help with childcare and household management. Maria was competent, trustworthy, and most importantly, had the kind of protective instincts that Derek valued when it came to Emma's safety. But Derek hadn't forgotten about Allison. Rebecca's network of contacts had been tracking her movements since she fled. Allison had made it as far as Mexico before going underground, but Derek's resources were extensive and his patience unlimited. On a Thursday morning in late spring, Rebecca entered Derek's office with a file that made him look up from his computer with interest. "We found her," Rebecca announced. Derek set aside his work and gestured for Rebecca to sit down. "Where?" "Costa Rica." She's been living in a small coastal town under the name Lisa Martinez, working at a tourist resort, keeping a low profile. Rebecca placed surveillance photos on Derek's desk. Allison looked different. Darker hair, different style of dress, more cautious body language. But it was definitely her. Where do we track her down? She made a mistake. Used one of her old credit cards to book a flight. The charge was flagged by our monitoring system, and we traced her from there. Derek studied the photos. Allison was sitting at a beachside cafe, apparently relaxed and confident that she had successfully disappeared. She had no idea that her past was about to catch up with her. Is she alone? As far as we can tell. No romantic relationships, no close friendships. She's been very careful about maintaining her cover. Derek leaned back in his chair, considering his options. He could have Allison arrested and extradited back to the United States, where she would face charges for attempted murder and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming, and she would likely spend the rest of her life in prison. But prison felt inadequate for what she had done. Allison had violated his trust, used his daughter as a weapon, and planned his murder with cold calculation. She deserves something more personal, more final. I want you to arrange a vacation for me, Derek told Rebecca. Somewhere warm. Costa Rica sounds nice this time of year. Rebecca nodded, understanding Derek's intentions without needing explicit details. What about Emma? Emma will stay here with Maria. This is something I need to handle personally. Derek spent the next week making careful preparations. He arranged for extended childcare for Emma, cleared his business schedule, and made sure his affairs were in order. He also made certain discreet purchases through contacts who didn't ask questions about the tools Derek requested. The flight to Costa Rica was uneventful. Derek traveled under his own name. There was no need for deception at this stage. He checked into a resort about 30 miles from where Allison was living, rented a car, and began his final surveillance. For 3 days, Derek watched Allison's routine. She worked the morning shift at the resort restaurant, spent afternoons reading on the beach, and evenings alone in her small apartment. She seemed genuinely at peace, apparently believing she had successfully escaped the consequences of her actions. On the fourth night, Derek made his move. Allison's apartment was on the second floor of a modest building overlooking the beach. The security was minimal, a simple lock that Derek bypassed in less than 30 seconds. He waited in the darkness of her living room as she returned from her evening walk. Allison turned on the lights and froze when she saw Derek sitting calmly in her chair. "Hello, Allison," Derek said. "We need to finish our conversation." Allison's hand moved toward her phone, but Derek shook his head. "I've already disabled the cell towers in this area. No one can help you now. How did you find me?" "You used a Morrison credit card to book your flight out of Mexico. After that, it was just a matter of patience and resources." Allison sat down heavily on her couch, suddenly looking much older than her years. "What do you want, Derek?" "I want you to understand the full consequences of what you did to my family." Derek stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit beach. "You know, I could have had you arrested months ago. The evidence against you is overwhelming. Phoenix police have reopened the Bradley Chin case based on Kowalski's confession. You're wanted for murder in 4 states. Then why didn't you?" Derek turned back to face her. "Because prison would have been too easy. You would have served your time, maybe gotten out in 20 years, and moved on with your life. That felt insufficient for someone who used my 4-year-old daughter as a weapon." Allison's face went pale. "I never wanted to involve Emma. That was Ray's idea. Don't lie to me, Allison. I have recordings of your conversations. You discussed manipulating Emma like she was a piece of equipment." Derek moved closer, and Allison pressed herself back into the couch. "You destroyed my family, violated my trust, and tried to murder me for money. But worse than all of that, you corrupted my innocent daughter and turned her into an accomplice to your crimes. What are you going to do?" Derek reached into his jacket and pulled out a small vial, the same type that Kowalski had used to store his poison. "I'm going to give you a choice. The same choice I offered you 3 months ago." He placed the vial on the coffee table between them. "Inside that vial is enough of Kowalski's compound to stop your heart in about 10 minutes. It will look like a completely natural death, heart failure brought on by stress and poor health. Allison stared at the vial in horror. You can't be serious. Your alternative is to come back to the United States with me, where you'll face trial for multiple murders, spend the rest of your life in prison, and never see daylight again. Derek sat back down in his chair. I'm giving you the dignity of choosing how this ends, Allison. That's more consideration than you showed me or Emma. There has to be another option. There isn't. You made your choices months ago when you decided to target my family. Everything that's happening now is just the inevitable consequence of those decisions. Derek checked his watch. You have 5 minutes to decide. After that, the choice gets made for you. Allison began to cry, but Derek felt no sympathy. He thought about Emma, about the anxiety and confusion his daughter had suffered because of this woman's manipulation. He thought about the months of systematic poisoning, the careful planning of his murder, the cold calculation with which Allison had destroyed his trust. Time's up, Derek said finally. Allison looked at the vial, then at Derek, then back at the vial. With shaking hands, she reached for it. I'm sorry, she whispered. No, Derek replied. You're not sorry for what you did. You're only sorry you got caught. Derek left Allison's apartment 10 minutes later. By morning, her body would be discovered by the resort management when she failed to show up for work. The local authorities would find a woman who had died peacefully in her sleep from apparent heart failure, a tragic but unremarkable event in a small coastal town. Derek caught a flight back to the United States that afternoon. He had tied up the last loose end of Allison's betrayal, and now he could focus entirely on building a safe, stable life for Emma. On the plane home, Derek reflected on the events of the past few months. He had been betrayed by the woman he trusted most, poisoned in his own home, and manipulated through his love for his daughter. But he had survived, protected Emma, and ensured that everyone responsible faced appropriate consequences. Derek Lansing was not a man who forgave betrayal or forgot transgressions. Allison and Kowalski had learned that lesson too late, but Derek hoped it would serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider threatening his family. Emma was waiting for him when he arrived home, running into his arms with the pure joy of a child who knew she was loved and protected. As Derek held his daughter, he made a silent promise that no one would ever hurt her again. The circle was closed. Justice had been served, and Derek Lansing's family was finally safe. Chapter 7. New Foundations. 6 months had passed since Derek's return from Costa Rica. The local Costa Rican authorities had ruled Allison's death as natural causes. Heart failure in a young woman with no known health issues. Tragic, but not unprecedented. Derek had read about it in an online news brief that mentioned the death of Lisa Martinez, 31, an American expatriate working in the tourism industry. Emma was thriving. The shadow that had hung over her during Allison's manipulation had completely lifted. She was excelling in her pre-kindergarten program, making friends easily, and displaying the kind of natural confidence that Derek remembered from his own childhood before his father's frequent deployments had taught him that the world was an unpredictable and often dangerous place. Derek's business was flourishing as well. Word had spread through certain circles that Lansing Solutions could handle problems that other security firms wouldn't touch. Derek's reputation for thoroughness and discretion had attracted a new class of clientele. People with complicated problems who needed permanent solutions. On a crisp autumn morning, Derek was in his office reviewing a proposal for a new client when Rebecca knocked on his door. "We have a situation," she announced as she entered. Derek looked up from his paperwork. "What kind of situation?" Rebecca placed a file on his desk. "Remember our friend, Dr. Kowalski? Turns out his network was bigger than we thought." Derek opened the file and began reading. According to Rebecca's research, Kowalski had been part of a larger organization of medical professionals who specialized in providing untraceable poisons and chemical compounds to clients willing to pay premium prices. "How much bigger?" Derek asked. "At least a dozen doctors and pharmacists across 6 states. They've been operating for years, providing services to everyone from jealous spouses to professional assassins." Derek studied the organizational chart Rebecca had constructed. It was an impressive operation, with multiple layers of protection and redundant security measures. "Why should this concern us? Kowalski's dead, Allison's dead, and we're not in that business." Because of this, Rebecca placed a second document on the desk. One of their clients was a woman named Patricia Kellerman. She hired them to eliminate her husband about 8 months ago. Derek looked at the photograph attached to the file. Patricia Kellerman was an attractive brunette in her early 30s, but something about her expression reminded him of Allison, the same calculating coldness behind seemingly innocent eyes. What makes this our problem? Patricia Kellerman's operation failed. Her husband survived, discovered her plot, and disappeared. She's been looking for him ever since, and according to our sources, she's been asking questions about Derek Lansing. Derek felt the familiar chill of recognition. She knows about Allison. More than that, she knows about our methods. She knows how thoroughly we dismantled Allison's operation, and she's worried that we might come after her next. Derek leaned back in his chair, processing this information. He had thought the situation with Allison was completely resolved, but apparently it had created ripple effects he hadn't anticipated. What exactly is she looking for? Insurance. She wants to eliminate any potential threats to her operation before they become problems. Derek understood immediately. Patricia Kellerman wasn't just paranoid. She was being strategically preemptive. In her mind, Derek represented a threat to her entire network, and she was planning to neutralize that threat before it could materialize. Where's she now? Local. She moved to the city about 2 months ago under the name Patricia Sanders. She's been conducting surveillance on your house, your office, and Emma's school. Derek felt ice form in his chest. She's been watching Emma for at least 3 weeks. We only discovered it yesterday when one of our routine security sweeps detected unauthorized surveillance equipment near the school. Derek stood up abruptly. The fact that another predator was targeting his family triggered every protective instinct he possessed. Emma had finally found peace and stability after the trauma of Allison's manipulation, and Derek would not allow anyone to threaten that. I want full surveillance on Patricia Kellerman immediately. I want to know where she's staying, who she's working with, what resources she has, and what exactly she's planning. Already in progress, Rebecca replied. But Derek, there's something else you need to know. Rebecca placed a final document on the desk. Patricia Kellerman isn't working alone. She's brought in professional help. Derek examined the file. Patricia had hired Marcus Vale, a former military contractor with a reputation for handling wet work that other professionals wouldn't touch. Vale was expensive, effective, and absolutely ruthless. Vale specializes in making problems disappear completely, Rebecca explained. His preferred method is to eliminate entire families, making it look like random violence or home invasions gone wrong. Derek studied Vale's photograph, a nondescript man in his 40s who looked like he could be an accountant or insurance salesman. But Derek recognized something in Vale's eyes that he'd seen in military zones and high-stakes operations: the complete absence of moral restraint. How long do we have? Based on their surveillance patterns and preparation activities, I'd estimate they're planning to move within the next week. Derek nodded, his mind already shifting into operational mode. He had dealt with betrayal and manipulation before, but this was different. This was a direct military assault on his family by professionals who understood exactly how dangerous Derek could be. I want Emma moved to a secure location immediately. Contact the Hendersons in Vermont. They owe me a favor from the Philadelphia situation. Emma can stay with them until this is resolved. What about you? Derek smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Patricia Kellerman and Marcus Vale want to play a professional game. They're about to discover that I wrote the rule book they're trying to follow. Derek spent the rest of the day making preparations. Emma was told she was going on a special vacation to visit some of Daddy's friends in Vermont. Maria would accompany her, along with 2 of Derek's most trusted security specialists. By evening, Emma was safely away from the city and completely off the radar of anyone who might be looking for her. With Emma secure, Derek could focus entirely on eliminating the threat. Patricia Kellerman had made the same mistake as Allison. She had underestimated Derek's capabilities and threatened his family. Unlike Allison, however, Patricia was a professional predator who understood the rules of engagement. Derek was looking forward to teaching her that the rules only applied to people who played fair. That night, Derek sat in his empty house, cleaning and checking weapons he hadn't used since his military days. Patricia Kellerman and Marcus Vale thought they were hunting him, but they had misunderstood the situation completely. Derek Lansing wasn't their target. He was their executioner, and he was about to demonstrate why that distinction mattered. Chapter 8. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. Derek's house was quiet in the pre-dawn darkness, but it wasn't empty. Hidden throughout the building were motion sensors, infrared cameras, and proximity alarms that would detect any unauthorized approach. Derek had spent years perfecting his home security, and now it would serve as both fortress and trap. He sat in his kitchen, drinking coffee and monitoring the feeds from Rebecca's surveillance team. Patricia Kellerman and Marcus Vale were holed up in a rented warehouse on the industrial side of town, apparently finalizing their plans for what they believed would be a simple assassination. Derek's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Rebecca. Targets preparing to move. Estimated time to your location, 45 minutes. Derek finished his coffee and began his final preparations. He had chosen to face Patricia and Vale in his own home for strategic reasons. The house was familiar territory that he could control completely, and more importantly, it would send a message about the consequences of threatening his family. Derek changed into dark tactical clothing and checked his equipment one final time. He had positioned himself to have multiple escape routes, superior firepower, and the advantage of knowing every corner of the battlefield. Patricia and Vale were skilled professionals, but they were walking into Derek's domain. At 3:17 a.m., the perimeter sensors detected movement. Derek watched on his monitors as two figures approached the house with professional competence, moving in coordinated patterns, checking for surveillance, avoiding obvious approach routes. Marcus Vale was leading, with Patricia following about 20 meters behind. Derek had to admit they were good. Their movement was fluid and disciplined, and they had clearly studied his property layout in advance. But being good wasn't going to be enough. Vale reached the back door first and began working on the locks with electronic tools. Derek could have stopped him immediately, but he wanted both intruders inside the house before he acted. Better to eliminate both threats simultaneously than risk one escaping to threaten Emma later. The lock clicked open, and Vale stepped inside, followed closely by Patricia. Derek watched them move through his kitchen and living room, their movements careful and professional. They were heading toward the stairs, apparently planning to attack him while he slept. Derek waited until they reached the halfway point of the staircase before he acted. The house lights came on all at once, instantly destroying Vale and Patricia's night vision advantage. Simultaneously, Derek triggered a sound system that flooded the house with disorienting white noise at painful volume levels. Vale reacted first, dropping into a defensive crouch and drawing his weapon while trying to locate the source of the lights and sound. Patricia stumbled backward down the stairs, momentarily blinded and off balance. Derek emerged from his concealed position at the top of the stairs, a tactical shotgun trained on Vale's center mass. "Drop your weapons," Derek commanded, his voice cutting through the white noise. Vale hesitated for a fraction of a second, probably calculating his chances of getting a shot off before Derek could fire. It was the last calculation he ever made. Derek's shotgun blast took Vale center mass, the impact throwing him backward down the stairs. He was dead before he hit the bottom. Patricia screamed and scrambled for Vale's dropped weapon, but Derek was already moving. He vaulted over the stair railing and landed behind her before she could reach the gun. "Patricia Kellerman," Derek said, pressing the shotgun barrel against the back of her neck. "We need to talk." Derek marched Patricia into his living room, where he had prepared restraints and recording equipment. Within minutes, she was secured to a chair with industrial zip ties, while Derek positioned himself where she could see him clearly. "You made a mistake coming here," Derek told her. "I know who you are," Patricia replied, trying to maintain her composure despite her obvious fear. "I know what you did to Allison Shun and Ray Kowalski. Then you should have known better than to threaten my family." Derek sat down across from Patricia, the shotgun resting across his knees. "Tell me about your network." "All of it." "I'm not telling you anything." Derek smiled coldly. "Patricia, You hired a professional killer to eliminate me and my 4-year-old daughter. You've been conducting surveillance on my family for weeks. You've already crossed every line that matters. Derek stood up and walked to a cabinet where he kept some of the equipment from his military days. He returned with a small device that Patricia clearly recognized. This is a military-grade truth serum, Derek explained. Very effective, but it has some unpleasant side effects. Permanent brain damage if the dosage is incorrect. Patricia's composure finally cracked. You can't do this. This is America, not some third-world battlefield. You forfeited any claim to civilized treatment when you decided to target my daughter, Derek replied. Now, let's try this again. Tell me about your network. Over the next 2 hours, Derek systematically extracted every detail of Patricia's operation. The network was even larger than Rebecca had suspected. Dozens of medical professionals providing untraceable poisons and chemical weapons to clients across the country. They had been responsible for hundreds of deaths over the past decade, operating with complete impunity because their methods were undetectable. Patricia also revealed the names and locations of her primary associates, the financial structure of their organization, and the methods they used to avoid law enforcement detection. How many others know about me? Derek asked. Just me and Marcus, Patricia replied, her voice hoarse from hours of interrogation. I was being careful. I wanted to eliminate you quietly before anyone else in the network realized you were a threat. Derek nodded. Patricia's caution had actually worked in his favor. Her death wouldn't trigger a larger response from her organization. What about backups? Dead man switches? Insurance policies? Nothing. I was handling this personally. Derek believed her. Patricia had been arrogant enough to think she could eliminate Derek quickly and quietly, without needing to involve her network or create complex contingency plans. As dawn broke through the living room windows, Derek made his final decision. Patricia Kellerman had organized the murder of innocent people for profit, and she had directly threatened Emma's safety. Like Allison and Kowalski before her, she deserved consequences that the justice system couldn't provide. I'm going to give you the same choice I gave Allison, Derek told Patricia. He placed a syringe on the coffee table between them. This contains a concentrated dose of your network's own poison. Quick, painless, and completely undetectable. Your alternative is to face trial for multiple murders and spend the rest of your life in a maximum security prison. Patricia stared at the syringe with growing horror. You're insane. No, Patricia. I'm thorough. You threaten my family, so you have to be eliminated. The only question is whether you maintain some dignity in how that happens. Derek checked his watch. You have 5 minutes to decide. Patricia spent those 5 minutes alternately pleading, threatening, and trying to bargain for her life. But Derek had heard it all before from Allison, and his resolve was absolute. People who threatened Emma faced complete and final consequences. When time ran out, Derek administered the injection himself. Patricia Kellerman died the same way her victims had, quietly, peacefully, with no external signs of violence. Derek spent the rest of the morning cleaning up. Vale's body was disposed of through channels Derek had established for precisely this kind of situation. Patricia's body would be found in her rented warehouse, apparently the victim of a drug overdose. Tragic but unremarkable in that part of the city. By noon, Derek's house showed no signs of the night's events. He called Rebecca to confirm that all surveillance evidence had been eliminated and that Patricia's network had no knowledge of her failed operation. That evening, Derek drove to Vermont to collect Emma. She ran into his arms with the pure joy of a child who had missed her father, chattering excitedly about her vacation and the new friend she had made. As they drove home together, Emma fell asleep in her car's seat, and Derek reflected on the events of the past week. Another threat to his family had been identified and eliminated. The network responsible for Allison's operation had lost 2 key members and would hopefully think twice before targeting the Lansing family again. Derek Lansing protected his own with absolute ruthlessness, and he never forgot a threat to his daughter's safety. Patricia Kellerman and Marcus Vale had learned that lesson too late, but their fate would serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider making the same mistake. Emma was safe. Derek's family was secure. and anyone who might threaten that security in the future would face the same uncompromising response. Derek Lansing was not a man who offered second chances to people who threatened his family. Chapter 9: New Beginnings. 2 years had passed since the Patricia Kellerman incident. Emma was now 6 years old, thriving in first grade, and had grown into a confident, happy child who showed no lasting effects from the trauma of her early years. She had friends, hobbies, and the kind of secure childhood that Derek had been determined to provide despite the chaos that had once surrounded their family. Derek's business had evolved as well. Lansing Solutions now operated on 2 levels: the legitimate security consulting firm that handled corporate clients and high-net-worth individuals, and a much more discreet operation that dealt with problems that required permanent solutions. Derek's reputation in certain circles had grown to legendary status, and his client list included people who understood that some threats could only be eliminated completely. On a sunny Saturday morning in spring, Derek was in his backyard watching Emma play on the swing set he had installed shortly after Allison's disappearance. His daughter was explaining in great detail how she was going to win the science fair with her project about butterflies, her face animated with the kind of pure enthusiasm that reminded Derek why everything he had done to protect her was worthwhile. Rebecca joined them for their weekly family barbecue, a tradition that had developed over the years as she had become more than just Derek's business partner. She was Emma's honorary aunt, the closest thing to a maternal figure the little girl had known since Allison's betrayal. "Any word from the Phoenix investigation?" Derek asked as Rebecca settled into a chair beside him. "Case closed officially last month," Rebecca replied. "They ruled Bradley Chen's death a homicide based on Kowalski's confession, but with all the perpetrators dead, there's no one left to prosecute. Chen's real wife collected the insurance money and seems to be moving on with her life." Derek nodded. Justice had been served, even if it hadn't followed traditional legal channels. Bradley Chen's family had received closure, and the people responsible for his murder had faced appropriate consequences. What about the pharmaceutical network? Scattered to the winds. Patricia's death spooked them, and most of the key players have either retired or relocated overseas. The DEA is still investigating, but without inside information, they're mostly just documenting crimes that are too old to prosecute. Derek was satisfied with this outcome. He hadn't set out to destroy the entire network, just to eliminate the specific threats to his family. The fact that his actions had disrupted a larger criminal organization was a beneficial side effect, but not his primary goal. Emma ran over to them, breathless from playing. "Daddy, can we get ice cream after lunch?" "Of course, sweetheart. But first you need to eat your vegetables." Emma wrinkled her nose but nodded, running back to her swing set with the kind of energy that only 6-year-olds possessed. "She's remarkable," Rebecca observed. After everything she went through with Allison, most children would have lasting trust issues. But Emma seems completely resilient. Derek watched his daughter play, feeling the familiar surge of protective love that had driven every decision he had made over the past 3 years. Children are stronger than we give them credit for, and Emma knows she's safe now. That makes all the difference. As the afternoon progressed, Derek found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. He had discovered betrayal in his own home, faced threats from multiple enemies, and been forced to make decisions that had permanently changed him. But through it all, his primary focus had remained constant: protecting Emma and ensuring her safety and happiness. Derek had learned that the world was full of predators who viewed other people as tools to be used or obstacles to be eliminated. Allison had seen him as a source of wealth to be systematically harvested. Patricia Kellerman had seen him as a threat to be eliminated. Others would undoubtedly emerge in the future with their own schemes and motivations. But Derek had also learned that he possessed the skills, resources, and absolute determination necessary to protect his family from any threat. He had built a life around the principle that loyalty and trust were sacred, and that betrayal carried consequences that were both swift and final. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Derek and Rebecca sat on the back porch, enjoying the quiet of the suburban neighborhood. "Do you ever regret how things turned out?" Rebecca asked. Derek considered the question carefully. I regret that Emma had to experience trauma because of Allison's choices. I regret that I didn't see through Allison's deception earlier. But I don't regret the way I handled the threats to my family. Even the extreme measures, especially the extreme measures. Rebecca, Allison was planning to murder me and leave Emma orphaned. Patricia Kellerman was planning to kill both of us. These weren't people who could be reasoned with or reformed. They were predators who had to be stopped permanently. Derek looked out at his peaceful backyard, where Emma's toys were scattered on the grass and her bicycle was parked by the garage. I built this life for Emma. I'll do whatever is necessary to protect it. Rebecca nodded, understanding Derek's perspective completely. She had seen enough of the world's darkness to know that sometimes violence was the only language that predators understood. "What's next?" she asked. "Next, we continue building the life Emma deserves. We keep the business growing, we maintain our security, and we deal with problems as they arise." Derek stood up and checked the locks on the back door, a habit that had become automatic since the early days of Allison's betrayal. But mostly, we focus on the positive. Emma's science fair is next week, and she's convinced her butterfly project is going to change the world. Rebecca laughed. She probably will change the world. Children who grow up knowing they're completely protected and unconditionally loved have a way of accomplishing extraordinary things. As Derek performed his nightly security check of the house, he felt the satisfaction that came from knowing his family was safe. The threats that had once surrounded them had been eliminated completely and permanently. Emma was thriving in an environment of stability and security that Derek had fought to create and maintain. Derek Lansing had learned that protecting the people you love sometimes required making choices that civilized society preferred to ignore. He had made those choices without hesitation or regret, and he would make them again if necessary. Emma's laughter echoed from her bedroom as she talked to her stuffed animals, and Derek smiled at the sound. His daughter was safe, happy, and innocent of the darkness that had once threatened to destroy their family. Derek had faced betrayal, eliminated threats, and built something pure and good from the ashes of deception. He was a man who protected his own with absolute ruthlessness, never forgave betrayal, and never forgot a threat to his family's safety. And in Derek's world, that was exactly the kind of man that Emma needed him to be. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. The fluorescent lights of County General Hospital buzzed overhead as Wesley Parsons sat in the oncologist's office, his 8-year-old daughter Daisy clutching his hand with a grip that belied her small frame. "Doctor." Rodriguez slid a folder across the desk, and Wesley already knew from the man's expression that the news wouldn't be good. "It's osteosarcoma," Dr. Rodriguez said quietly. "Bone cancer. Aggressive, but treatable if we act immediately." Wesley felt the world tilt. Daisy looked up at him with those enormous brown eyes, the same ones his late wife Lori had, and he forced himself to smile. Lori had died 2 years ago in a car accident, leaving Wesley to raise their daughter alone on his teacher's salary. He'd been making it work barely, but this was different. "What are we looking at?" Wesley asked, his voice steady despite the hurricane in his chest. "The treatment protocol is complex. Surgery to remove the tumor, followed by chemotherapy and possibly radiation. The surgery alone will run about $30,000, and with chemo, physical therapy, and follow-up care, you're looking at roughly $60,000 total. Your insurance will cover some, but given your deductible and co-pays." Dr. Rodriguez hesitated. "You'll need about $45,000 out of pocket. Maybe more." $45,000. Wesley's teaching salary was $52,000 a year. After rent, utilities, food, and Daisy's school expenses, he had maybe $8,000 in savings. He'd already gone through most of Lori's life insurance, paying off her medical bills and the funeral. "When do we start?" Wesley asked, because there was no other question. Daisy was his world, his reason for breathing. He'd figure out the money somehow, ideally within 2 weeks. "The sooner we operate, the better her chances. This type of cancer is fast-moving in children. Wesley nodded, shaking the doctor's hand as Daisy sat silent beside him. On the drive home to their small apartment in South Portland, she finally spoke. "Am I going to die like Mommy?" Wesley pulled the car over, unbuckled both their seatbelts, and pulled his daughter into his arms. "No, baby. No. I promise you. We're going to beat this. You're going to grow up and do amazing things. I promise." He felt her small body shaking with sobs against his chest, and he made a silent vow to whatever higher power might be listening. He would save his daughter, no matter what it took. That evening, after putting Daisy to bed with extra hugs and her favorite story, Wesley sat at their kitchen table with a calculator and a pile of bills. He'd already maxed out his credit cards, covering basic expenses. He'd taken on extra tutoring jobs, but even working 70 hours a week wouldn't generate $45,000 in 2 weeks. He thought about taking out a personal loan, but his credit was already stretched thin, and the interest rates would be crushing. There was one option he'd been avoiding. His parents, Tom and Patricia Parsons, lived 40 minutes away in an upscale neighborhood in West Lake Hills. Tom had owned a successful chain of hardware stores across Oregon before selling out 5 years ago for a substantial sum. Wesley's childhood had been comfortable, even privileged, though his parents had always been more interested in appearances than affection. Wesley hadn't spoken to them much since Lori's funeral. They'd made it clear they thought he'd married beneath himself. Lori had been a nurse from a working-class family, and their attendance at the funeral had been perfunctory at best. But surely, when it came to their only grandchild's life, they would help. He picked up the phone and called. "Wesley," his mother's voice came through, cool and measured. "This is unexpected. Mom, I need to talk to you and Dad. It's about Daisy. Can I come by tomorrow?" A pause. "I suppose. Come for lunch. 1 o'clock. The next day, Wesley left Daisy with his neighbor Mrs. Chen, a retired teacher who'd become like a grandmother to her. He drove to his parents' sprawling Tudor-style home, his stomach knotted with a mixture of hope and dread. His mother answered the door in tennis whites, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite supposedly coming from the club. At 62, Patricia Parsons maintained the same rigid composure she'd had throughout Wesley's childhood. His father appeared from his study, a tall man with silver hair, and the perpetual expression of someone evaluating a disappointing investment. "Let's make this quick," Tom said, glancing at his Rolex. "We have a dinner engagement at 6. Wesley swallowed his irritation and explained Daisy's diagnosis. He laid out the treatment plan, the costs, and his financial situation with painful honesty. "I'm asking to borrow $45,000. I'll pay you back, with interest if you want. I just need help saving my daughter's life." His mother and father exchanged a look that Wesley couldn't quite decipher. Finally, Tom spoke. "Wesley, you've always had a problem with financial planning. If you'd taken that job at the firm I arranged instead of insisting on teaching, you wouldn't be in this position. Dad, we can discuss my career choices later. Right now, what you need," Patricia interrupted, "is to learn that actions have consequences. You chose to marry that woman against our advice. You chose a career path that would never provide adequately. You chose to keep that child when we suggested adoption after Lori's death, given your situation." Wesley stared at his mother, unable to process what he was hearing. "That child? That's your granddaughter. She's 8 years old, and she has cancer." "We're aware," Tom said. "And while it's unfortunate, we can't enable your poor decision-making by bailing you out. You need to figure this out yourself. It's called being an adult. I'm an adult. I'm a father trying to save his daughter's life." Wesley's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. "You have the money. You sold the business for $7 million. $45,000 is nothing to you. It's not about the money," Patricia said coldly. "It's about principle. If we give you this money, what's next? Another crisis? Another handout? Where does it end?" Wesley felt something crack inside him. "If Daisy dies because you won't help, I will never speak to you again. You understand that? Never." "That's your choice," Tom said, standing. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to prepare for our evening." Wesley drove home in a daze, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. He couldn't process what had just happened. They actually refused to help save their grandchild's life over some warped sense of principle. Over the next week, Wesley threw himself into fundraising with desperate energy. He started a GoFundMe, organized a bake sale at his school, reached out to every friend and acquaintance. The teaching community rallied around him. Colleagues donated, parents of his students contributed, even some of his former students sent money. But the donations came in slowly, $50 here, $100 there. After a week, he'd raised $11,000, nowhere near enough. Then, 8 days after the diagnosis, Wesley's sister Sandy called. Sandy had always been the golden child, beautiful, charming, married to Damon Quinn, a real estate developer. Their son, Jared, was 10, 2 years older than Daisy, and Tom and Patrika doted on him in a way they'd never doted on their own children. "Wesley, I heard about Daisy from Mom," Sandy said, her voice saccharine with false sympathy. "That's just terrible. How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," Wesley said curtly. He had no patience for his sister's performative concern. "Listen, I wanted to give you a heads up. Mom and Dad are doing something really special for Jared this week. They bought him a car. Can you believe it? I know he's only 10, but it's an investment piece, you know? A 2023 Porsche 911 Turbo S. $280,000. They're keeping it garaged until he's 16, but they wanted him to have something to look forward to. Isn't that amazing?" Wesley's phone fell from his hand. $280,000. For a car. For a 10-year-old. The same week they'd refused to lend him $45,000 to save Daisy's life. He picked up the phone with trembling hands. That's great, Sandy. Really great. I have to go." He hung up before she could respond and made it to the bathroom before he vomited. That night, after Daisy was asleep, Wesley did something he'd never imagined he'd do. He called his former college roommate, Clark Garner, who'd become a somewhat shady financial consultant. Within an hour, Clark was at his apartment. "I need money fast," Wesley said. "I don't care how. A loan from a loan shark, whatever. I'll pay any interest rate." Clark studied him. "How much?" $35,000. "I've raised 11 already." Clark pulled out his phone, made several calls, and by midnight had arranged a loan from a private lender at 38% interest compounded monthly. The terms were predatory, but Wesley signed without hesitation. He had 5 years to pay back the loan, or the lender would claim his apartment and garnish his wages. Wesley didn't care. Daisy's surgery was scheduled for 3 days later. The surgery took 7 hours. Wesley sat in the waiting room, surrounded by cards and flowers from his colleagues and students, pointedly absent of anything from his parents. When Dr. Rodriguez finally emerged, his mask around his neck and exhaustion in his eyes, Wesley stood on shaking legs. "We got it all," Dr. Rodriguez said. "Clean margins. The chemo will be rough, but she's got a real fighting chance, Wesley." Wesley collapsed into a chair and wept for the first time since Lori's death. The next 6 months were the hardest of Wesley's life. Daisy endured 4 rounds of chemotherapy, each one devastating. She lost her beautiful brown hair, lost weight until she looked like a wraith, spent days vomiting or sleeping. But she fought. God, did she fight. Wesley was with her every moment he wasn't teaching, reading to her, playing games, holding her hand through the worst of it. His colleagues covered his classes when he needed to be at the hospital. His students made cards and videos. Mrs. Chen cooked meals and refused payment. The community that had always been there for him proved their worth daily. His parents didn't call once. Sandy called twice, once to tell him about Jared's birthday party, a carnival in their backyard with real rides, and once to ask if Wesley could teach Jared's friend group for free, since family should help family. Wesley hung up on her the second time. The loan payments started coming due, brutal and relentless. Wesley took on a third job grading papers for an online academy, working from midnight to 3 a.m. After his tutoring sessions, he slept 4 hours a night, lived on coffee and determination, and watched his daughter slowly, miraculously, begin to recover. After 4 months, Daisy's scans came back clear. After 6 months, her hair started growing back, dark and curly. After 8 months, she returned to school part-time, thin and tired but alive. After a year, Dr. Rodriguez used the word that Wesley had been terrified to hope for: remission. Daisy was going to live, but Wesley was drowning. The loan payments were $1,500 a month, and that was just the interest. He was behind on rent, behind on utilities, behind on everything. He'd sold Lori's car, sold their furniture, sold everything of value except his teaching materials and Daisy's belongings. They were eating ramen and pasta most nights. Wesley had lost 30 pounds he couldn't afford to lose. One evening, as he sat at the kitchen table trying to figure out how to make $50 last 2 weeks until payday, Daisy climbed into his lap. She was 9 now, still small for her age, but her eyes were bright and alive. "Daddy, why don't Grandma and Grandpa ever visit?" Wesley's jaw tightened. "They're busy, sweetheart. Do they know I was sick?" "Yes. Did they help us?" Wesley looked at his daughter's earnest face and made a decision. He wouldn't lie to her. She deserved the truth. "No, baby, they didn't." "Why not?" "I don't know. Some people don't show love the way they should." Daisy was quiet for a moment. Then she hugged him fiercely. "You show love perfectly, Daddy. We don't need them." Wesley held his daughter and felt something cold and hard crystallize in his chest. She was right. They didn't need his parents. But that didn't mean he would forget what they'd done. Or rather, what they hadn't done. He just didn't know yet that he wouldn't have to wait long for an opportunity to return the favor. 2 years crawled by. Wesley continued working 3 jobs, slowly chipping away at the crushing debt. Daisy thrived. Her cancer remained in remission, and she became a vibrant, funny 10-year-old who wanted to be a marine biologist. She made friends at school, joined the science club, and showed the same fierce determination that had gotten her through cancer. Wesley remained civil but distant with his parents on the rare occasions they crossed paths at family events he couldn't avoid. He watched his nephew Jared grow into an entitled, spoiled 12-year-old who expected everything handed to him. The Porsche remained garaged, waiting for its future driver, a $250,000 monument to misplaced priorities. Then, during the summer before Daisy's 5th grade year, something unexpected happened. Wesley's former colleague, Dr. Luis Clements, approached him about a unique opportunity. Luis had left teaching 2 years earlier to work for a tech startup developing educational software. The company had just received massive funding and was expanding rapidly. They needed someone with real classroom experience to head their curriculum development division, someone who understood both pedagogy and how to communicate with teachers. "The salary is $140, plus equity," Luis said over coffee. "I immediately thought of you, Wesley. Your innovative teaching methods, the way you've developed cross-curricular programs, you're exactly what we need." $140,000. More than double his current salary, and the equity could be worth considerably more if the company succeeded. Wesley could pay off his debt, move to a better apartment, give Daisy the life she deserved. "When can I start?" Wesley asked. The transition happened quickly. Within 2 months, Wesley was settled into his new role at Edutech Solutions. The work was challenging, but fulfilling. He was helping develop programs that would impact thousands of students across the country. More importantly, he was finally able to breathe financially. He paid off the predatory loan in one lump sum, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't realized had become part of his identity. He moved Daisy into a 3-bedroom townhouse with a small yard where she could plant a garden. He bought her a new bike, new clothes, took her to the aquarium she'd been dreaming about for years. He even started saving for her college education. For the first time since Lori's death, Wesley felt like he could actually live instead of just survive. His parents heard about his new position through Sandy and called for the first time in over 2 years. "Wesley, darling, we heard about your new job." Patrika's voice was suddenly warm, as if the last few years hadn't happened. "We should have dinner to celebrate." "I'm busy," Wesley said flatly. "Oh, don't be like that. We're family. Besides, we have some exciting news too. Jared is about to start at Westlake Academy, you know, the prep school. $15,000 a semester. But he deserves the best." Wesley hung up without responding. He blocked their numbers and went on with his life. Another year passed. Daisy turned 11, healthy and happy. Wesley was promoted to Vice President of Curriculum Development, his salary increasing to $180 with substantially more equity. Edutech was preparing for an IPO, and if it succeeded, Wesley's shares could be worth over $1 million. He dated occasionally, nothing serious, but it felt good to remember he was more than just a father and provider. He reconnected with old friends, took Daisy on a vacation to the coast, and slowly rebuilt the life that cancer and debt had destroyed. Then, on a cold November evening 3 years and 2 months after his parents had refused to help save Daisy's life, Wesley's doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting visitors. Daisy was at a friend's house for a sleepover, so he was alone, enjoying a quiet evening with a book and a glass of wine. He opened the door and froze. Tom and Patricia Parsons stood on his doorstep. They'd aged dramatically. Tom's silver hair had gone white, and he'd developed a stoop in his shoulders. Patricia's face, always so carefully maintained, looked haggard, despite expensive makeup. Most striking was their clothing worn and dated, nothing like the designer outfits they'd always favored. "Wesley," Tom said, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "We need to talk to you." Wesley leaned against the doorframe, not inviting them in. "About what? Can we come inside?" Patricia asked. "Please?" "I don't think so. Say what you came to say." His father's face reddened. "Don't be childish. This is important. Was it childish when I begged you to help save your granddaughter's life?" Wesley kept his voice level, almost conversational. "Was it childish when I worked 3 jobs and slept 4 hours a night to pay for her treatment while you were buying Jared a car worth 6 times what I needed?" "That's what we need to talk about," Patricia said, and Wesley heard something in her voice he'd never heard before. Fear. "Can we please come in?" Against his better judgment, Wesley stepped aside. They entered his comfortable townhouse, taking in the nice furniture, the art on the walls, the obvious markers of success. He didn't offer them a seat. "I'll stand," he said. "You have 5 minutes." Tom and Patricia exchanged a glance. His father spoke first. "We made some bad investments. Very bad. We lost most of our money." Wesley raised an eyebrow. "Most?" "All of it," Patricia admitted. "Tom got involved with a development deal that Damon pitched to him. It was supposed to triple our investment. Instead, the developer was running a Ponzi scheme. We lost everything: the house, the savings, the retirement accounts. Everything." Wesley felt nothing. No sympathy, no satisfaction, nothing. "And we need help," Tom said. "We're living in a 1-bedroom apartment. I had to sell the cars, the boat, everything. Patricia's jewelry is gone. We're barely scraping by on Social Security. And you came to me because you're our son," Patricia said, tears forming in her carefully lined eyes. "Because we need you. We need somewhere to stay until we get back on our feet. Your house has 3 bedrooms. 2 bedrooms, Wesley corrected. One is mine, one is Daisy's, one is my home office. You could make room for a few months," Tom said, his voice taking on a wheedling quality that made Wesley's skin crawl. "Just until we figure things out. We're family." Wesley laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "Family. Family is supposed to be there when you need them. Family doesn't let their granddaughter die over principle." "We made a mistake," Patricia said, the tears flowing now. "We know that. We were wrong. We were terrible. But we're desperate, Wesley. We have nowhere else to go." "What about Sandy?" Wesley asked. "What about Jared? I'm sure he'd love to have his grandparents stay in that mansion in Lake Oswego." Tom and Patricia's faces fell further, and Wesley felt the first stirring of genuine curiosity. "Sandy won't speak to us," Tom admitted. "The development deal, it was Damon's company. When it collapsed, he blamed us for investing our money and encouraging others to invest. He said we should have done more due diligence. He and Sandy divorced, and she got the house, but she's struggling now too. She said we're toxic, and she needs to focus on Jared." Wesley almost laughed at the irony. "And Jared? He's not handling things well," Patricia said quietly. "He's 14 now, and Sandy says he's become difficult. Angry. He blames us for the divorce, for his father leaving. Sandy put him in therapy, but it's expensive, and she had to cut back on his school and activities. He barely speaks to us." 14, Wesley mused. "So he can drive that Porsche in 2 years. Oh wait, you had to sell that too, didn't you?" His father's face crumpled. "We sold it 18 months ago. Got $90,000 for it. Used cars depreciate quickly, even expensive ones. It's gone now. Everything is gone." Wesley studied his parents, these people who had raised him with cold efficiency, who had valued appearances over love, who had chosen a car over their granddaughter's life. They looked broken, desperate, and old. "Please, Wesley," his mother whispered. We're begging you. We just need help getting back on our feet. Maybe 6 months, a year at most. We'll contribute what we can from Social Security. We'll help around the house. We'll be good house guests." Wesley was quiet for a long moment, watching them squirm. Then he spoke, his voice clear and calm. "No." The single word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "What?" Tom stared at him. "What do you mean? No. I mean no. I won't help you. You're not staying here. Not for 6 months, not for 6 days, not for 6 hours. But we have nowhere to go." Patrika's voice rose to a near shriek. "We'll be on the street. Then I suggest you figure it out. It's called being an adult." Wesley threw his father's words from 3 years ago back at him. "You made your choices. Now, deal with the consequences." "This is different," Tom said desperately. "This wasn't our fault we were defrauded. And Daisy getting cancer wasn't her fault, or mine, but that didn't matter to you, did it?" Wesley's voice remained steady, but his eyes were cold. "You had $7 million and wouldn't spare $45,000 to save your granddaughter. You bought Jared a car the same week. A car worth more than most people's houses. A car for a 10-year-old. We were wrong." Patrika was sobbing now. "We admitted it. We're sorry. Sorry isn't good enough. Sorry doesn't give me back the 2 years I spent working 18-hour days and drowning in debt. Sorry doesn't give Daisy back her childhood innocence. She knows exactly why her grandparents abandoned her when she needed them most. Sorry is just a word you're using because you need something from me." "Please," Tom said, and there was something in his voice Wesley had never heard: genuine desperation, stripped of all pride and pretense. "Please, Wesley, we're your parents." Wesley looked at the two people who had given him life but never really given him love. The people who had taught him that appearances mattered more than substance, that money was more important than family, that pride was worth more than compassion. "You were my parents," Wesley said quietly. "Past tense. The day you refused to help save Daisy was the day you stopped being my family. Now, you're just two strangers who happened to raise me." He walked to the door and opened it. Cold November air rushed in. "Get out." "Wesley," Patrika reached for his arm. "Get out." His voice was harder now, brooking no argument. "And don't come back. Don't call, don't text, don't send letters. You made it very clear 3 years ago where I stood in your priorities. Now you know where you stand in mine." Tom tried one last time. "If you do this, you're no better than we are." Wesley smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Wrong. I'm exactly like you. I learn from the best. The difference is, I'm using your lessons against you instead of my daughter. Now, leave before I call the police for trespassing." His parents shuffled out into the November cold. Patrika was still crying. Tom's shoulders were hunched in defeat. They walked to an old, dented Toyota Corolla, a far cry from their former Mercedes and BMW. Before they drove away, Tom turned back one last time. "You'll regret this someday." "No," Wesley said. "I really won't." He closed the door and locked it, standing in his warm, comfortable home. He felt no guilt, no remorse, no satisfaction. He felt nothing but a strange sense of completion, as if a chapter of his life that should have ended years ago was finally, truly finished. The next morning, Wesley woke to find several voicemails. His father, his mother, Sandy, all begging him to reconsider, to show compassion, to be the bigger person. He deleted them without listening to the full messages and blocked their new numbers. That afternoon, he picked up Daisy from her sleepover. She bounced into the car, talking excitedly about her friend's new kitten and their plans to start a marine biology club at school. She was healthy, vibrant, full of life and dreams and a future that Wesley had fought like hell to secure. "Hey, Dad," she asked as they drove home. "Can we get fish tacos for dinner? I've been craving them all day." "Absolutely," Wesley said, ruffling her curly hair. "Whatever you want, kiddo." That evening, as they sat at their kitchen table eating fish tacos and Daisy told him elaborate stories about underwater kingdoms, Wesley's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Wesley Parsons?" A woman's professional voice. "This is Linda Martinez from Adult Protective Services. I'm calling regarding Thomas and Patrika Parsons. They listed you as their next of kin." Wesley's stomach tightened. "What about them?" "They were found sleeping in their car in a Walmart parking lot this morning." Someone called us out of concern. We're trying to arrange emergency housing, but they're refusing services and insisting their son will help them. That's you, I assume? Wesley was quiet for a moment. Daisy was watching him curiously, her taco halfway to her mouth. Miss Martinez, I'm going to be very clear with you. Tom and Patricia Parsons are not welcome in my home, nor will I be providing them any assistance. 3 years ago, when my daughter was dying of cancer, I begged them for help and they refused. They told me I needed to deal with the consequences of my choices. Now, they need to deal with the consequences of theirs. There was a pause on the line. Mr. Parsons, I understand family situations can be complicated, but there's no but, Wesley interrupted. They made their choice. I'm making mine. Please don't contact me about them again. And Miss Martinez? They have another daughter, Sandy Quinn, in Lake Oswego. I suggest you try her. He hung up and looked at Daisy. Everything okay? She asked. Everything's perfect, sweetheart. Eat your taco before it gets cold. Over the next week, Wesley heard through mutual acquaintances that his parents had ended up in a transitional housing program for homeless seniors. Sandy had also refused to help, apparently unwilling to jeopardize her own precarious financial situation. Jared, now a troubled teenager dealing with his parents' divorce and the loss of his privileged lifestyle, wanted nothing to do with his grandparents. The people who had once been the center of their own carefully constructed social world found themselves completely alone, abandoned by everyone whose love they'd taken for granted or never properly earned. Wesley felt no joy in their suffering, but no guilt either. He'd meant what he said they'd taught him well. They taught him that family was conditional, that love had a price, that pride mattered more than compassion. They just never expected to be on the receiving end of those lessons. A month later, EduTech went public. Wesley's stock options were suddenly worth $1.3 million. He didn't cash them all out. He learned about financial planning the hard way, but he sold enough to pay off his townhouse, set up a substantial college fund for Daisy, and donate $50,000 to the pediatric oncology unit at County General Hospital in Lori's name. He also set aside $45,000 in a separate account. Not for his parents, they would never see a dime from him, but as a reminder of what that amount of money had cost him, and what refusing to pay it had cost them. Christmas came. Wesley and Daisy spent it with Mrs. Chen and several colleagues from EduTech. They exchanged gifts, ate too much food, watched movies, and laughed until their sides hurt. It was the best Christmas Wesley had experienced since Lori was alive. His parents sent a card. They must have found his address somehow. Inside was a handwritten note. Wesley, we hope you'll find it in your heart to forgive us someday. We love you and Daisy. We're so sorry for everything. Please call us. Mom and Dad. Wesley read it once, then dropped it in the fireplace. Daisy watched it burn, curling into ash. Do you think you'll ever talk to them again? She asked. Wesley considered the question seriously. His daughter deserved an honest answer. I don't know, sweetheart. Right now, I can't imagine it. They hurt us very badly when we needed them most. Sometimes, when people show you who they really are, you have to believe them. And sometimes, forgiveness isn't about them deserving it. It's about you deciding if you're ready to let go of the anger. I'm not ready yet. Maybe I never will be. That's okay, Daddy. You taught me that we get to choose our family. Not just by blood, but by who shows up when we need them. Mrs. Chan is more family than they ever were. Wesley pulled his daughter into a hug, marveling at her wisdom. Cancer had stolen her innocence in many ways, but it had also given her a perspective beyond her years. You're pretty smart, you know that? I get it from you. She grinned. Spring arrived, then summer. Wesley's work continued to thrive. Daisy completed 6th grade at the top of her class, her cancer now 2 years in remission. Dr. Rodriguez called it a miracle. Wesley called it his daughter's stubborn refusal to quit. One evening in July, almost 4 years after the initial diagnosis, Wesley received a call from an unknown number. He'd stopped blocking them. His parents had eventually gotten the message and stopped trying to contact him. Is this Wesley Parsons? A man's voice. Official sounding. Speaking. This is Officer Rogelio Park with the Portland Police Department. I'm calling regarding Thomas and Patricia Parsons. I understand they're your parents? Wesley's grip on the phone tightened. What happened? They were involved in a physical altercation at the transitional housing facility where they'd been staying. Apparently, There was a dispute over bathroom access that escalated. They're not being charged, but the facility has asked them to leave. They're currently at the station, and they've been asking us to call you. I won't be picking them up or offering assistance, Wesley said. They're adults. They can figure it out. Sir, I have to be honest with you, they're not in good shape. Your father has some mobility issues, and your mother appears to be experiencing some cognitive decline. They need family support. Then I suggest they contact their other daughter. Her name is Sandy Quinn, Lake Oswego. I can give you her number. They said she won't speak to them. Then they should probably think about why both their children have cut them off, officer. Unless they're being charged with something that requires my presence, I'm going to let you go. I have dinner with my daughter. There was a long pause. Mr. Parsons, I don't know what happened between you and your parents, but they're vulnerable adults who need help. Officer Park, 4 years ago, my 8-year-old daughter had cancer. I asked my parents, who had millions of dollars, to lend me $45,000 to save her life. They refused and bought my nephew a sports car the same week. When I asked them about it, they told me I needed to learn that actions have consequences. So I learned. They taught me well. Now, they're learning the same lesson. Officer Park was quiet for several seconds. Then, I see. I'm sorry to have bothered you, Mr. Parsons. I hope your daughter is doing well now. She is. Thank you, officer. Wesley hung up and found Daisy standing in the kitchen doorway, having clearly heard at least his side of the conversation. They're in trouble again? She asked. Seems like it. Are you going to help them? Wesley looked at his daughter, 12 years old now, cancer-free, smart and strong, and everything good in his world. No, baby. I'm not. Good, she said firmly. They don't deserve you. That autumn, Wesley heard through Sandy that their father had suffered a stroke. He was in a county hospital, recovering slowly. Patricia was staying in a women's shelter, unable to care for him and with nowhere else to go. They were, by every definition, destitute. Sandy called him directly, bypassing his blocked number by using her son's phone. Wesley, you have to help them, she said without preamble. I know you're rich now. Everyone knows about your stock options. You can afford to help them. Can you? Wesley asked. That's different. I'm barely keeping Jared and myself afloat. The divorce destroyed me financially. And how much did you get for Jared's Porsche when Mom and Dad sold it? Did you see any of that $90,000? Sandy was silent. I thought so, Wesley said. You got your cut, didn't you? And where did it go, Sandy? Private school tuition? Designer clothes for Jared? A vacation to make up for Daddy leaving? That's not fair. Fair? Wesley's voice went cold. You called me the week Daisy was diagnosed to brag about a car our parents bought for your son after refusing to save my daughter's life. You called me again to ask if I'd teach Jared's friends for free, because family helps family. You never once asked how Daisy was doing during her treatment. You never sent a card or a meal or even a text message. So don't talk to me about fair, Sandy. They're our parents. They stopped being my parents when they chose a car over their grandchild's life. I'm done with this conversation. Don't call again. He hung up and blocked Jared's number too. The holidays approached again. Wesley heard through a former colleague that his father had been moved to a Medicaid-funded nursing home, his stroke having left him partially paralyzed. His mother was living in a room at a low-income senior apartment complex, working part-time at a grocery store to supplement her Social Security. The mighty had fallen, and Wesley watched from a distance with the detachment of someone observing strangers. On Christmas Eve, Daisy found him in his home office, staring at a photo of Lori on his desk, the last picture taken before her accident, her smile bright and full of life. You okay, Daddy? Just thinking about your mom, Wesley admitted. She would have known what to do about Grandma and Grandpa. She always knew the right thing to do. Daisy climbed into his lap, too big for it now, but still his little girl. What would she have said? Wesley thought about it. Lori had been kind, compassionate, always willing to see the best in people. But she'd also been fierce when protecting her family, and she'd never tolerated cruelty. Honestly, I think she'd tell me that forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. That I can let go of anger without letting them back into our lives. That some bridges, once burned, don't need to be rebuilt. Do you think you'll ever forgive them? Maybe someday. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. They made a choice that showed me exactly who they are. I'm just honoring that truth. Daisy hugged him tight. I'm glad I got you for a dad instead of someone like them. I'm glad I got you for a daughter, period, Wesley said, kissing the top of her head. The years continued to pass. Wesley's career flourished. Daisy entered high school, joined the marine biology club, and talked excitedly about colleges with strong oceanography programs. She remained healthy, with annual checkups showing no signs of cancer recurrence. The shadow of those terrible months faded into memory, never forgotten, but no longer defining their daily lives. Wesley dated a few people seriously, though nothing stuck. He'd learned that finding someone who could accept his past, his daughter, and his uncompromising stance on family boundaries was rare. He was okay with that. He and Daisy had built a good life together, surrounded by people who had proven their love through actions rather than words. He never heard from his parents again directly. Occasionally, news would filter through the grapevine. His father's health continued to decline. His mother was still working at the grocery store, struggling with arthritis and the indignity of poverty in her 70s. Sandy eventually reached out once more, trying to guilt him with tales of their parents' suffering, but Wesley had perfected the art of saying no. One day, as Wesley was driving Daisy to a marine biology camp she'd been accepted to for the summer, she turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always. Do you ever regret not helping them?" "Grandma and Grandpa, I mean." Wesley had known this question would come eventually. Daisy was 16 now, old enough to grapple with the complexity of his choice. "Honestly, no, I don't. And here's why. Helping them would have taught you the wrong lesson. It would have taught you that people can treat you terribly, abandon you in your darkest moment, and still expect you to save them when the tables turn. It would have taught you that being family is enough, even without love or loyalty or basic human decency." He glanced at her, then back at the road. "What I want you to learn instead is that you have the right to protect yourself from people who hurt you, even if they're blood. That love is proven through actions, not obligations. That when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them, and that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is say no." Daisy was quiet for a moment. "What if they die and you never see them again? Will you regret it then?" "Maybe. Grief and regret are complicated. But I'll tell you this. I won't regret protecting you and the life we've built. I won't regret choosing your well-being over their comfort. And I won't regret teaching you that self-respect matters more than other people's approval. Even families' approval, especially families," Wesley said firmly. "Because families that truly love you won't make you choose between your self-respect and their approval. They won't abandon you when you need them, and then expect you to sacrifice yourself when they need you. Real family, the kind that matters, shows up. Our real family showed up. Mrs. Chen, my colleagues, your doctors and nurses, our friends, they were there when we needed them. That's family." Daisy nodded slowly, seeming to absorb this. Then she smiled. "You know what? I'm proud of you, Dad, for sticking to your principles, for teaching me that it's okay to walk away from toxic people, even if they're related to you." Wesley felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thanks, kiddo. That means more than you know." Years later, when Wesley was 52 and Daisy was finishing her doctorate in marine biology, he received a letter. It was from a law firm, and his hand shook slightly as he opened it. He knew what it would say before he read the words. Thomas Parsons had died of complications from his stroke. The letter was a courtesy notification from the nursing home's legal department. There would be no funeral. His body was being donated to science. As was his wish, there were no assets to settle, no estate to manage. He had died as he'd lived his final years, with nothing. Wesley sat with the letter for a long time, trying to identify what he felt. Sadness? Relief? Regret? In the end, he felt mostly empty, the way you might feel learning that a distant acquaintance had passed. Tom Parsons had been his father in biology only. The man who had raised him with cold efficiency and taught him that money mattered more than people was gone, and Wesley felt nothing. He called Daisy, now Dr. Daisy Parsons, working at a marine research facility in California. "Hey, Dad," she answered, her voice bright. "What's up?" "Your grandfather died," Wesley said simply. A pause. "Tom, are you okay?" "I'm fine. Honestly, I don't feel much of anything. Do you want me to come home?" "No. Sweetheart, stay focused on your research. There's nothing to come home for, no funeral, no service." I just wanted you to know. Okay. Well, I love you, Dad. I'm sorry you're dealing with this, even if you didn't have a relationship with him. I love you too. And Daisy, thank you. For what? For being the reason I kept fighting. For being worth every sacrifice. For being living proof that I made the right choice. He heard his daughter smile through the phone. Always, Dad. Always. 6 months later, another letter arrived. Patrika Parsons had died in her sleep, a heart attack in her small apartment. Again, no service, no estate, no reconciliation, just a notification that she was gone. Wesley sat in his home office now in a beautiful house overlooking the river, bought with his success, and looked at the photos on his wall, Daisy at her college graduation. Daisy receiving an award for her research. Daisy with her friends, bright and healthy and alive. Mrs. Chen, now 90, at her birthday party last month. His colleagues from EduTech at the company's 10th anniversary celebration. His close friends from the cancer support group he'd attended during Daisy's treatment. His real family. He'd made his choice 12 years ago when he closed the door on his parents. He'd chosen his daughter's life, his own self-respect, and the principle that love must be mutual to matter. Looking at the life he'd built, the daughter who had thrived, the peace he'd found, he knew he'd chosen correctly. Wesley took both letters, his father's and his mother's, and placed them in a folder labeled The Past. He filed it away in the back of a drawer, out of sight, but preserved. Not because he needed them, but because they represented a lesson learned, a line drawn, a decision made. Some bridges, once burned, don't need to be rebuilt.